Well, actually it all goes back to 1865, the original International Telegraph Regulations in 1865. This was to govern the movement of telegraphs across the European nation-state boundaries. So that's ancient history. In 1988, they had a conference in Melbourne where they revised them to deal with more telephony and so on. But again, if you think about 1988, that is well before the internet, well before liberalization, the telecom liberalization processes, the privatization of British Telecom, etc. was just 4 years old, the breakup of AT&T. So, you know, people were of the opinion that this should be changed. And in fact, I was appointed by the Secretary General of the ITU in 2000 to be on the expert group looking at revisions to the ITRs, the International Telecom Regulations. That didn't go anywhere, I suppose, because we actually came up with very competition-oriented, market-focused, liberal rules, at least my group. And there was a bit of a deadlock because there were other countries that wanted more government controls. So that didn't go anywhere, but there was sort of a mandate that came from one of the plenipotentiaries that such a conference should be held in 2012. Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that some people who think that governments and international organizations matter a lot think or say or claim that the 1988 regulations led to the extraordinary public policy successes that we have seen in terms of you know, the fastest spreading ICTs in the world being the mobile and the internet going like gangbusters and all that. I really don't believe that. I don't think that that particular archaic piece of international regulations had anything to do with this. So the way I see it is, you know, the most important thing is that they stay out of the way. So I don't mind if these regulations go through and they come up with some international treaty, which gives some guidance, some overall overarching principles. But in real fact, what we should do is that now that the industry has been liberalized and there's decentralized innovation going on all over the place, nobody really knows what's going to happen next. In that situation, the important thing for governments is to stay out of the way. If you really look at it almost from their perspective, right, or from any telecom operator's perspective, these were networks that were designed and dimensioned to carry voice traffic, small amounts of voice traffic. Increasingly, these networks are carrying vast amounts of data. And data is now making voice a small and inconsequential part of the traffic. For the operators, to use the words of one of the Egyptian official, who I didn't really expect to hear, he said, these are a burden, these are harmful to the network. So for them, I mean, obviously these things they impose a load on the network and actually cause congestion. Could cause quality of service problems if the investment doesn't keep pace. But to actually call the new innovations, the new data that we are using, as people, everybody should be overjoyed about this. Instead, they call it harm to the network or a burden on the network. This is that old monopoly thinking. You know, the best telephone network is one that is not used by anybody, that is in pristine quality for the engineers to play with, right? So, you know, the Europeans, particularly these particular companies, I think are rather archaic, not very innovative. They don't know how to respond, come up with innovative business models. They have difficulty in responding to this. And they are looking around and saying, okay, where's the money? Google's got money, Facebook's got money. Why don't I take something from them? But it has pernicious consequences. It can break the internet as we know it. It can deprive young people in developing countries of the access they want and need. So that is why I am opposed to it. I am not going to oppose human greed as a general principle. The issue is that today, for various reasons, most of the content that is used by people, internet content that is used by people in the developing world, happens to be on servers outside the developing world. It's not like we don't make our own YouTube videos. Kalaveri, D, and I mean, those are videos that we made here. But where do they live? They go and live there. They live on hosts that are not in the developing world. Now, the problem is that for everybody who wants to watch that video, the network that hosts that video will have to pay the network from where the request comes. If this proposal goes through, which means that there will be a process of balkanization where they won't send information to these countries, or information content will have to move behind paywalls. And then we will not be able to pay either because we can't afford it or because we don't have the mechanisms to make the payments. Today it's just a click, can you watch what you want, and then you move on because it's a very seamless kind of structure. So in this context, we believe that this is harmful to the driver of internet growth in the developing countries, because people are not driven to the internet because the government lays fiber optic cables or gives spectrum or any of these supply side things. Those are necessary conditions. The sufficient condition is that there must be attractive content, attractive applications, things that people want. So if you suddenly turn that off, this momentum that we are having about more and more people getting onto the internet could stop. That is why my organization, which has been looking at this process of bottom of the pyramid adoption of new information and communication technologies, is opposed to this proposal. As far as I can see, I mean, the example that I use is of Mr. Salkan's Khan Academy. He is a Bangladeshi guy who goes to MIT to get a PhD, and then he becomes an investment banker, and then he innovates, and he becomes a social entrepreneur, and he's teaching the world mathematics. Not only mathematics, I've looked at his art history YouTube videos, right? I mean, it's great stuff. Who cares where he lives, where his server is, where his non-profit is incorporated? I mean, to me, I don't see these borders as very important, but that's me. Why? There are some people who care for these things. Well, you have sort of the benefit of the status quo, the written word. There's certain sort of structural things in procedures. So Egypt was in charge of writing and revising the text and presenting the text, and for some sad reason, a very monopolistically oriented retrograde thinker was doing it. And Ghana's role was that of getting something done. So they didn't really pay attention to the content. They were just trying to tick the boxes and get the proposals through. Now, on the other hand, Uganda, Botswana, countries that have engaged with regulation in useful and interesting ways and are experiencing rapid growth, they expressed concerns. But in a way, they were being steamrolled. Because there are a whole number of countries where, basically people with monopoly thinking had moved into the government offices from monopoly operators, and they were the people at the table. Well, very interestingly, the South African government delegation didn't turn up. The only South Africans who were there were from the privatized, partially government-owned company, Telecom. And they were somewhat reasonable, even though they were an incumbent telephone company. They were somewhat reasonable because they actually know how the technology works compared to some of the other people in the room. So one hopes that the southern part of Africa, South Africa, Botswana, perhaps even Zambia, Zimbabwe, might take a slightly different position from this statist, interventionist and retrograde position that was sort of dominant at the meetings. The crucial body for this is called the Asian Preparatory Meeting, and there were 2 meetings coordinated by the Asia Pacific Telecommunity, and unfortunately somehow this marginal country called Iran had got in the driver's seat like Egypt had in Africa at the second meeting, and they had not been able to reach agreement, and they are going to a 3rd meeting sometime in the next month or so to see whether they can reconcile the differences, because this is a very dynamic sector and there are many countries here who don't want to go the sort of the retrograde path that Iran is proposing. But on the other hand, there seems to be enough people who are with Iran that it's not that Iran is a minority. So that issue has yet to be resolved in Asia, but I'm hopeful and confident that Iran will not be the standard bearer of Asian thinking on the internet, God forbid. Well, it will break their business model. Their business model today is basically an advertising driven, numbers driven business model where we are not fundamentally important to their revenue streams, but we are not unimportant. We are part of the equation, at least as future prospects, right? So when they trot out the numbers saying we got this many million people using our services, they are counting the Indonesian millions and the Indian millions and so on, right? They see a future prospect here. So in that sense of an advertising kind of based model, audience aggregation model, open world, an open internet is useful. A balkanized internet is not very useful. It would require that many of the business models will have to be redone. And as the Internet Society says, it will also require that the internet have to be re-engineered, because the internet as it is today can't generate the kinds of information these people want. We'll have to break it and sort of remake it in some totalitarian way. These are complicated issues. I have seen enough of that activity. I mean, there is an organization called the Association for Progressive Communications that is taking a very active role in fighting this. In India, the Center for Internet and Society has taken a very active role. I would like to point out, for example, what the situation is in India. So the Indian government, with the BRICS, sadly, Brazil, South Africa, India, China, Russia, the Indian government had taken a rather statist, controlling kind of position on these matters. And the Indian civil society, when they got aware of it, including the private sector, had really given it to them last month, saying, in whose name are you speaking? You should speak for us and you should consult us. So that internal debate is happening because India is, in a sense, a democratic society. That is happening. I'd like to see that happen in the other countries as well. I think we should call our governments to account and say, in whose name are you destroying the internet that has worked very well for us? The ICT story is the greatest public policy success of our times. We have not succeeded in providing drinking water to our people or transport or anything to the extent that we have succeeded in giving them the use of ICTs. It's not broken, it's working. Don't break it.